Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about a new and fascinating topic that me personally, I've never talked about it before. So I'm excited to talk to our guest today about it. We are going to talk about netiquette, or as we call it, Netizen etiquette today with Dr. Mary Kempnich. Mary is a psychologist, a social network and connections researcher, and a conscious connection coach for high achievers, helping them connect better to themselves, their work, and other people. She is passionate about finding out how we can best navigate a fast-paced, globalized world where opportunities for connections can seem endless and elusive at once. Because the most important ingredient to a long, healthy, successful, and truly fulfilling life is sharing it with people you love. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mary.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so, this topic is relatively new, I would say. I don't think I've seen this terminology before. It's probably somewhere on the internet, I guess, but I just haven't seen it. So this is going to be interesting, and we're going to talk about it some more later on in the conversation. So we'll keep that as a teaser for our audience. But I'm kind of curious about, the work that you're doing, because it's quite niche, especially when I read the part about you being a conscious connection coach for high achievers. I was like, wow, that's cool. I didn't know that was a thing, So I would love to get you to share a bit more about yourself with our audience, especially how you got here in your career and why you chose to do this work.
Yeah, gladly. So I've always been super excited about how people connect with one another. I think most of us may have had experience about leaving home behind, moving somewhere else, and kind of reorientating yourself socially. And I found that a fascinating concept, like who do we still stay in touch with despite the distance? And how do we make new friends? And does that mean someone else has to go? So that was this is what prompted my PhD, just figuring out how do we do it? Because this is such a novel thing for us as humans on this planet. And then from there, I was quite struck with a lot of the high achievers around me doing it quite well, but often at the expense of something. So it seems like if we're excelling professionally, quite often our private life seems like it has to suffer as a consequence. Or if we're trying very hard to make sure that our private life in terms of social connections is okay, then maybe our health is going to suffer. And I really did not like that. And I've had a lot of personal experience with that. I've had chronic fatigue for a very long time, which meant that I was super limited in terms of my energetic output for the day. And I had to be very strategic about how do I spend what I've got. And it made me just dive in very deep, both academically and really look into all the psychology connected to how do we connect to one another? How does that benefit our well-being and also ultimately our performance? But then I've also ventured deep into coaching, started getting lots of certifications in different realms, and really understanding how can we actually connect more consciously to ourselves first and foremost, because that puts us in a very different position into how we interact with the world. And then how does that translate into connecting better with our work, but also with other people, so that it's not a zero-sum game and that everything gets amplified together.
Wow, that's wonderful and totally relatable for me, because I think I briefly mentioned this before, but I moved from Vietnam to Australia, a very, fascinating experience. And, making connections to me at this point in my life still is something that I struggle with and I kind of find fascinating because, when I was here for my education, I was kind of like, oh, this is really cool. I love all the people here. And at one point I was like, these are the coolest people I've ever met. And then life changes, and then, people start to move on to next chapters in their lives, and then move away, or, move to the suburbs. And then, it starts to get harder, not to mention the friends that I have back home. I'm still in touch with them, but it's not the same thing anymore. And, this kind of, it's kind of like the different circles in my life. And I'm sure a lot of expats or people who have moved countries can relate with. The circles keep changing.
Exactly. So we have natural fluctuations anyway. It's not likely that the people that you meet as you're born are the people that you're going to stick with throughout the rest of your life. However, the degree of fluctuation that we now are facing is quite unusual in terms of our history, because even 100 years or so ago, if you were to move to a different continent, that would mean you're not really in touch with the people that you've left behind. And the internet is this beautiful opportunity where we can choose to maintain the contact, but it is a different kind of quality to it. And it might come at a cost in terms of how well we integrate somewhere new. And I also really like what you said about like life changing, and that makes it easier or more difficult as we go along. So we have this beautiful developmental trajectory where in the beginning you have a lot of milestones in life, such as going to school, where you will just be surrounded by people and you don't have to put in a lot of effort to form connections. You will see these people every single day and you might fight, but then you're also encouraged by the entire community to make up and to maintain that bond. Whereas especially when you hit 30, plus or minus a couple of years, there seems to be a real plateau in terms of no more influx of people, and the circle becomes more quality over quantity oriented, which can be a nice thing for many people. Also, the objectives seem to change. There's a lot about family building, different types of communities. You're mentioning the suburbs as an example, and sometimes there being a mismatch about some people being there at 43 and others at 22 already. And there's this gap in friendship sometimes in terms of where we're going with life. And it's exciting, but at the same time, it can also be more difficult to venture out and meet new people, especially if you are also in a new location, if you don't have a supportive community system that sort of facilitates that.
Yeah, that is so true. I think it's a fascinating thing to navigate. And, I still have this burning question on my mind, like, how do we make friends as adults, and how do we, maintain the connections we already have as an adult? It's tough. But thankfully we have, the internet, which kind of helps in a way. And there are also other different issues that we are going to uncover when we start talking more about this topic. But before we get far ahead of ourselves, let's talk about you a bit more. So we have a section where we get to know our guests better. And to get to know you better, we have you met Mary? So we're going to get some of your recommendations and things that you love just to get to know you a bit better. The first question I always ask my guests, I love this question because I love reading. What is a book you would recommend?
Yes, I thought about this question and I keep coming back to The Great Gatsby. I think it is my favorite fiction book for a while, ever since I first read it in English class a long time ago, because there are a lot of themes in it that I think are highly relevant to today, although it's taking place 100 years ago. And there is this one quote about you can be loneliest like in a crowd, in terms of being at a party, and it's so intimate because there's so many people. So there's a lot of juxtapositions in terms of being surrounded by people. Does that actually mean we're feeling connected, or can that also make us feel particularly isolated? So I love that book. I've reread it a lot of times. And then on a non-fiction front, The Women Who Run with Wolves one, I think is one that I keep going back to, that I would recommend not just to every woman, but to people in general, because I think it's a beautiful chapter by chapter going through folklore and fairy tales, illustrating a lot of the issues that women face, that I think is absolutely marvelous to read again and again.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I actually have that. I've been having that on my reading list for a long time, but I haven't read it. So now that you mention it, I definitely have to read it. Thank you.
And take it slow. I feel like it's one where you read like a chapter and then you walk through life for a bit and then you read another one. It's not like a one night kind of reading it as quickly as possible.
Okay. That's good to know. Good to know. Thank you. So next question is about movie. What is a movie you would recommend?
So this year I loved the Barbie movie, and I didn't think I would. I think that was spectacular. Last year I really loved the Everything Everywhere All at Once. I thought that was great. But my all-time favorite, might come as a bit of a shock, is Aristocats. I think it's a wonderful film. It's not just for kids, because it's one of those old school Disney ones where every character matters. even if they're small, even the little mouse is very crucial to the plot. And it's a lot of different animals coming together to make something work. And it's a lot about family values and just like sticking together. I really love that one.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your generosity. You know, we asked for one recommendation. You shared
It's
3.
hard to choose.
Yeah. Books and movies, really hard to choose because there's so many great ones out there. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Now, I know that you're currently our guest of the day. I'm not sure if you actually listen to podcasts yourself. And if you do, which one would you recommend?
Esther Perel. I really like Esther Perel. And that's just one recommendation, but she has 2 podcasts. So one's called Housework and the other one is Shall We Begin, I think, or something similar. And one is exploring more relationship issues between couples and the other one is more relationship issues at work. Both excellent. She's excellent.
Oh, very cool. Well, I haven't heard her podcast before. So yeah, I'll probably have to give that a go. Thank you. Now, in the next question, I know that we send you the question about famous role model, but I like to rephrase it by asking, who is your role model? And it doesn't have to be a famous person. It could be someone you know personally.
Yeah, I thought about that question and I don't think I have a role model as such. I think I look at different people around me for facets of where I can learn from them. I've been very fortunate. My mom in some ways is a role model for me because she's been faced with a lot of difficult things in her life and she managed them beautifully. But there's also been a lot of other women when I was growing up, the parents of my friends or other women that were helping me or people that I tutored for and those families that just took such an interest in seeing me and helping me kind of explore my gifts further. So for me, anyone who's looking at the people surrounding them and helping them get to the next level, that to me is true role model potential.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you for sharing that. Final question in this part is about education. Now, I'm sure you've completed a lot of courses, but I wonder which one left a really strong impact on you.
The one I'm doing right now, because it's so different. So right now I'm in the 2nd year of certification as a sex, love, and relationship coach with the VIDA method with Layla Martin. And it's beautiful work. I'm really good when it comes to the cognitive side. I'm really clever. I sort of breezed through all the academics, but this is somatic work. This is spiritual, but very deeply scientifically founded work that works with the wisdom of the body. And it's something I've been very interested in for a couple of years now, and I've been practicing privately, but learning to facilitate that in other people keeps humbling me and sort of showing me how potent it is. So I'm very much in awe of that program. I can recommend that to anyone, but it is a lot of work. It takes you very deep. And it's something that I think really deserves the term life-changing, which I'm always cautious of saying about things. But for that one, I would absolutely think that's warranted.
Yeah, very cool. Fascinating. What is that about, actually? I know you mentioned briefly what it is, but I'm still curious.
Yeah, so it's inspired by tantric principles, and it's actually a way to use your body-mind wisdom to get what you want in terms of love, sex, and relationships. So whether you want to call in a relationship, whether you want to transform your marriage, whether you want to let your sexuality blossom, or just work on self-love, it is a set of tools that really takes you out of your head and into your body, and that releases things in the body and kind of frees you to be your most authentic, radiant self that you don't even know are there. And you don't have to cognitively work it out. It's your body doing it for you, which to me, as like such an academic, was just a revolutionary thing to learn about, let alone implement on my own. And now getting to hold other people, and that is just, it's astounding.
Yeah, that sounds really cool, actually. Well, thank you. Yeah, now I know why you're so switched on by it. It sounds like a lot of work, but also, I guess, it's kind of different from academic work in general, right? Because it's lots of practicing real things. And I'm going to be excited to see how you're going to help others to flourish in such areas, because that's tough. Those are not easy at all.
Yeah, and these are often the places where we get at the core of it, right? So we have connections with so many people. We have connections to work. It doesn't even have to be a person. It can be a concept of, opening your emails on a Monday morning. That can be a relationship that you have to that process. And in your intimate relationship, that's where those things come out the most clearly. And that's where I think any friction, any tension that you're having is just an indication that if I'm getting to the core of it here, it's not going to be an issue anywhere. And I love that. I think it's the most efficient. If you're looking for efficiency in terms of upgrading your relationships, look at the one with yourself and then with your intimate partner, because that holds the keys for all other areas.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. All right. So now we've got to know you better. Let's talk about netiquette and well-being. I think this is such a new concept. And in preparation for this podcast, I was thinking hard about it. And I was like, I actually don't know what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to leave myself to be surprised by the insights you're going to share. But first of all, let's talk about well-being. What does well-being mean to you personally?
Yeah, so well-being, there's different definitions. And if I'm just going from my own sense, it's actually being fully present and alive in the moment. And I know this sounds a bit counterintuitive, because when we talk about well-being, we talk about physical health, we talk about mental health, we might even talk about financial health, because that all contributes to our sense of well-being. But I think for me, the indicator that all of that is there is that you get to fully take in the moment. I always call it being present for pleasure and just being alive in the moment that is. That to me is the best definition of well-being.
Super cool. I think that's a really nice way to look at it, because, we can go broad and we can use fancy words to describe it, but how we feel moment to moment is important. It's actually really hard to achieve what you're defining, though, because, being switched on all the time, being like excited and alive at every single moment is probably something that I think people struggle with. It's not that easy to get, especially because, life happens, things change. Sometimes you have challenges that you kind of encounter and you are sucked into a space where it's really hard to get out of your head and, get into your body, like what you were saying earlier. And that's where a lot of people struggle with well-being, myself included. I'm not sure about you, but I also kind of want to touch on a lot of different things that this show is about. So obviously it's about well-being and the different facets of well-being and how we can get there. And so because your definition is quite, I would say like it's quite unique in the sense that, okay, it's talking about the moment, but lots of kinds of moments can happen, right? So lots of different situations can arise. How would you say it differs from, different situations?
Yeah, I love that you were talking about it being a bit of a tall order and that it's actually challenging. And I completely agree personally as well. I used to live in my head for most of my life. And it took a while to even understand that there is a different possibility. When people talk about things and they're like, I feel like this, I would look at them really suspiciously and be like, I don't know if I'm buying it. Like, I'm not sure if that's true. So it takes a little bit of time to see that's true generally, and then that's true for yourself. And there was a word you used when you said about being excited all the time. And I think this is one of the misconceptions that often causes a lot more harm for us personally, is this idea that to be in the moment means to be happy all the time. And I don't mean that. And I think it's a really important thing to differentiate. There is, and I know there's some questions around this that you might want to ask me later, so I don't want to take too much away. But there are these ideas floating around about positive thinking and positive psychology, and you're just meant to be like, everything is great, my life is amazing. That could not be further from actually being in the moment, right? Because being in the moment means taking the moment for what it is. And ideally, not even perceiving a need to judge it. So even if it's a moment that is super pleasurable and joy-filled and you're experiencing bliss, by making that a great thing that we have achieved and we want to achieve it again, you're taking away the magic from it, even from the highs. And similarly to the lows, if you're feeling really unhappy, we've all, I think, been caught in the rain unexpectedly and we're on our way somewhere and we're late and the wind is like in our face. And that's not a moment where we would be like, I'm so happy to be alive necessarily, but we can still bring presence to that moment and be like, right now I'm getting rain in my face. And just sort of acknowledge that that's happening, right? And then you might even laugh. Like, you've just been laughing because it's a comical situation when you're just like, here I am, looking like a wet poodle. Like, that can be something that will actually like bring you joy, not because it's a great moment, but because you're like, yeah, that's life too. So I think it's a lot of that, a lot of being okay with what is and not having this pressure and this need to make it like a beautiful tale, or like, well, I got rain in the face first, but because I was late, I met the love of my life, so it's all worth it. We don't have to twist it into something that is a beautiful tale with a little bow on top. which I think links quite strongly with what we see on when we're linking it to the internet, right? Like how we're presenting ourselves. Very often we give that version that is like, it was all worth it. I loved it. But like, did we really, and is it necessary? I think not.
Yeah, totally. That's actually a really good point when you mentioned that misconception about well-being, because that kind of reminds me of something. And I don't know how it's going to relate to this, but I think it does relate to what you're saying. So I think a lot of the times in life when there are uncomfortable moments, especially, you feel the need to escape from it. There might be a little bit of, there might be a sense of, discomfort or maybe even shame because, you do something or you experience something embarrassing and you kind of like, oh, I just want to like run away from it and, never look back. But yesterday, something extremely funny happened and I was kind of like, past me would probably be embarrassed. But current me is kind of enjoying that and had a good laugh, just like what you were saying about the rain incident. So I was basically wearing my AirPods in a cafe and I was trying to talk to the waitress. I took off my left AirPods and it bounced off the table to somewhere that I couldn't find. I started to look for it everywhere and it was nowhere to be found. And I started freaking out because I needed to go. And also there are a lot of people in that cafe. And I was like this person just standing up and crawling around looking for it everywhere. No one knew what I was doing. The waitress came and she tried to help. But then, eventually we couldn't find it. And I tried to use the Find My application to, identify where it is. And it kept saying that it's here. And I was like, what do you mean it's here? It's not here. I can't see it. And so I started freaking out, talked to the waitress. Long story short, it was actually here. It got stuck into my shirt. Great. And when I found it, no one was around for me to share that moment with. So I just picked it up, put it back in the case, laughed to myself, walked out, and I said to the waitress, I found it, haha. And she was like, where is it? And I told her where I found it. And then we had a good laugh. And then off I went with my day. I think past me would have been just like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. And I'm so stupid or I'm so dumb or whatever. But, yesterday I had a good laugh about it. It was a weird situation. It was not enjoyable per se. And, it was like, I think it was like 15 minutes of me crawling around a cafe full of people. But, it was fine.
I love this story because I think we all have had situations like this, right? Like I've had this so much. Like I drop an earring and I can't find it and it's right in my shoe or something. I've had very similar situations, so I completely understand it. And I'm so curious because you were talking about like past you. What do you think allowed yourself to handle it differently now?
Well, I think maturity is definitely one thing. As you grow older, you embrace who you are better and you're just better at laughing at yourself. And I think this goes back to childhood as well. And I think a lot of psychologists can agree with this because I've been reading up on psychology a lot. And, the formative experiences when you were a child really just dictate how you're going to carry yourself. And, probably you're going to have to heal from that, right? And I remember as a kid, if there was anything that was embarrassing, the teachers would make other kids laugh or they would criticize, kids in general, not even me. I was the observer. But when I saw that, I was like, oh, that is so uncomfortable. And so I never wanted to make a mistake or never wanted to look foolish. I always wanted to be like this, really like nice and polished version of myself. Never wanted to, make a mistake. And so it was extremely hard for me to laugh at myself. Yeah. And it was kind of like this sense of, okay, I shouldn't be making mistakes. And if I make a mistake, I should cover it up so that other people don't know. And so now, slowly as I grew older, especially when I moved abroad and, started living on my own and doing my own things, I realized that, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Laughing at myself is a life skill.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that explanation because I think that's what it is for so many of us, right? Like shame and guilt are such strong experiences in our body and in our nervous system that we would do a lot to just avoid it. And especially if we've been brought up in a community where it was actively encouraged to use that as a tool to sort of direct behavior, right? There are some people that say there is actually no function for shame that is necessary, which I think is an interesting argument. There's other people that are researching shame that see it a bit more nuanced. The idea sometimes being that, well, through shame, we can teach people not to do something that is truly harmful to themselves or to the community, which I think has merit. But I do wonder if we need shame for it, because there's other emotions like sadness, like regret or like being angry that we might be able to use instead. So I'm glad you're bringing this up, because I think shame is one of those things that we think when we're teaching other people through shame, we think we're helping them to become better people. And I'm sure that those teachers had good intentions. A lot of times our parents or even our siblings, they have intentions of making us a functional being in society, and they're actually wanting us to connect better with other people, with opportunities in life, right? This is where it comes from. But I wonder sometimes if the effect isn't the opposite, because when you're made to be felt ashamed or embarrassed or guilty of something, our tendency is to withdraw, and is actually to isolate, because as you were saying, like presenting this polished, perfect picture image isn't the authentic truth. It's not being in the moment. It's not fully being alive, right? And so instead of it helping us to connect better or to be more suitable to be introduced to communities, I think it actually makes us withdraw more and hide in a shell. So the idea behind it, I think, is well-intentioned, but I do sometimes wonder if we need it at all. And I know this is a bit of a radical thing to say, but I really wonder if we need it at all. And I would be curious to see more examples of us being completely shame-free, and that not necessarily meaning we're this wild, inhibited creatures that are just, like ripping our clothes off, like running through the streets screaming. That's, I think, what people are afraid of might happen. I don't think that necessarily has to happen.
Yeah, totally. I think it is a big topic in itself, and we can probably have a separate podcast just on that topic. But yeah, I really like what you just pointed our attention to, and I'll do some thinking about it as well. I have a few things to say about it, but I'm conscious that we are here to talk about netiquette, so let's talk about it. And going right back to the beginning of the conversation where you said, you moved. I think you were actually in your previous bio that I saw, you kind of moved abroad and you did your studies abroad as well. I've done the same things. I can kind of understand that, staying in touch with our people or people in our lives that are not necessarily in the same location is super important to us. And that is, a facet of digital social connectedness. It is a mouthful, but, for our audience who is new to this topic, and especially the concept of netiquette, what is digital social connectedness? What is netiquette, and how do they connect?
Yeah, so again, I'm just going with personal definitions. I feel like digital social connectedness goes beyond staying in touch with certain people in your life. So we have some tools where we have one-on-one conversations with people that are in a different locations. We also have groups where we're interacting with a group of friends or a group of family members. But to me, this idea of digital social connectedness goes a little bit beyond that, because we do have the potential to meet strangers online. We do have the potential to sort of broadcast, in a sense, messages that are close to our heart, or just, sharing something with the world that we feel like other people would benefit from. And it's this idea of actually perceiving yourself to be a part of that community. So you're not, I think you used the word observer earlier, you're not standing on the sidelines, kind of lurking in a corner, looking in through a window, but you're actually part of it. So to me, it's that sense of I am part of the group of people that happen to meet online. And that group can be undefined. And there might be people that are strangers that become friends. There might be people that you've known for a long time. Netiquette to me is a bit of a funny word. I think it is most easily understood if it's just about how do we behave with one another? How do we interact with one another? And in a nutshell, the easiest way to think about it is what you wouldn't do offline, would you do that online, making that a question? And the answer might be yes in certain instances, but making that a conscious question. So a lot of my conscious connection emphasis is about thinking about it and actually connecting with it and then making a decision. You might still make exactly the same decisions you've always had in life, but you've made it consciously. And that is all the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a really good question to ask, actually, because we interact with people online so much nowadays. And, even me interacting with my friends in the same city, Melbourne here, most of the time we text. We don't even call, sometimes, and this is what I struggle with, actually. Sometimes people start conversations on Instagram And I think that is weird to me. I don't know if it's a generational thing or it's just a personal preference, but I don't like a conversation to happen on Instagram. Like, if I wanted to have a conversation about, oh, how are you going with everything? I want to tell you about this thing. Tell me about that thing. I would rather text them.
Yeah.
Or have
and
a call.
I think, you're making a good point about the the changes between the generations. So I think there's a curious shift happening. So my dad used to tell me that back in the day, and I'm saying that in quotation marks because what does that mean? When he wanted to meet friends, he would just go to the town square and he would just go there on like a Friday night. And then he would hope that some people he knows and likes would show up. And it worked somehow, because he said, I've never had an evening where I was by myself. So it worked, but it seemed to work on a very informal basis. And you kind of made do with who happened to be around you. And if someone didn't show up, you didn't know if they chose not to, if they would come later. It was sort of just, you would meet up in person. I think that shifted a lot more to phone conversations, and maybe you and my generations when we were younger. I remember in primary school, elementary school, I'm not sure what you call it here, people just being on the phone a lot after school and just talking about what happened during the day.
Yes.
And now what I see is there's young people that are absolutely terrified about calling, not just the doctor to make an appointment. That seems to be a prominent piece of conversation online about people having to call the doctor to make an appointment, and that being horrific, but also calling each other. And now it can even be seen as an insult if you call a really close friend on their phone unannounced without a good reason, which I think is just funny. I don't think it's necessarily good or bad. It's just a shift in etiquette. It's a shift in understanding what is the norm for communication. And now you're saying that even in a text-based exchange, you have a preference as to where it happens on your phone, right? It's all on your phone, but you're like, I prefer it to be text. I think that is another generational difference, where some people feel like I'm at home on WhatsApp, on like whatever it might be, and other people say, no, that's not for me. I'm only communicating this way. So it becomes further and further individualized, I think, and it also becomes more and more difficult to actually meet up in person without it taking a lot of organizational effort.
Yeah, definitely. And the funniest thing is, I find that, when I was younger, it's like, like, hey, are you free? Like, let's hang out. And then we just like gather. And then now, obviously, as you grow older, you have more responsibilities and you kind of have to like align, things. But with new friends, sometimes it's already hard to make plans. But with new friends, I found this really hilarious thing where I would say, hey, people nowadays tend to add each other on social media, i.e. Instagram, instead of exchanging phone numbers, right? Mm-hmm. And I find it to be kind of like a little weird to me that they kind of like hesitate to give out phone numbers. And I'm okay with that. Like, if they don't like it, that's fine. But I found it so funny because I've had a few instances where I was like, I messaged those people on Instagram. I was like, hey, nice to meet you. If you want to meet up, here's my number. Let me know if you want to share your number, and then we can, call each other if needed. And then they just ignored that. They leave it on that social media space. And I was like, and I started to think in my head, I was like, I don't really understand what's going on here, because I think if you want to meet up, make plans and, like talk to each other, the easier way is to call. I know you can call on Instagram, but my Instagram notification is always permanently off. So I don't communicate that way on social media. And so I find it kind of hard to navigate all these kinds of friendship where people prefer social media. Yeah. And I wonder if it's a part of netiquette.
Yeah, I think it can be. So I love that you gave that example, because what I think we've seen happen over the last couple of decades is that some of our personal information in terms of how we're contactable is becoming increasingly more private and harder to get to. So it seems like we're shifting in terms of who can get to us, to our core. Our addresses, we tend to not share online, and I think there's good reasons why. But Definitely. Even our phone numbers from landlines, not everyone has a landline anymore. That used to be a way that is sort of like a legitimate place where you reside, and this is where someone can call on you. And you remember from when you were younger, you would have to call a friend's house and it would be their parents to pick up, and you had to introduce yourself and say, I'm calling for Johnny. And then you would hope that, that would work out. So there was, and you could look up this phone number in a phone book. It was like publicly available information. And now that seems to be more and more private because, and ironically, I think I've seen something like this online where now the people that call you from an unknown numbers, it tends to be scam like callers, right? It tends to be fraud. It's not actually someone who wants to be a friend. So I think we're becoming increasingly protective of those identifiable ways of contacting ourselves, like one another, and we make it a little bit less high touch. We make it a little bit more elusive, which on the one hand is great in a sense because it feels easier to give out that way of being contactable. It's easy to say, oh, find me on Instagram, and you could have 1,000 people find you. That might not be overwhelming, but in terms of the quality of that interaction, you are sort of putting them on the periphery of your social sphere. And I think this matters because you can hold more people if it's at an arm's length, and it's harder to hold that number of people if they're close to you. So I don't know if you're familiar with this. I've done my PhD with Robin Dunbar, who's come up with Dunbar's number. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
Yes.
It's this idea that we are limited in terms of how many people we can actually meaningfully engage with. And he very cleverly came up with this, and it's just showing up everywhere in life once you start looking, that there seems to be a boundary of 150 people. If we go beyond that boundary, it becomes hard for us on the one hand in terms of time. If you had 300 friends and you wanted to give them an equal share of your time, that would seem impossible, but also cognitively to keep up with everyone. You have to remember not just your friend's name. I mean, that's sort of the bare minimum, but you will know things about them, right? Like, do they have siblings? Are they in a relationship? Do they have a pet? Like, are they facing a certain challenge right now? Like, are there certain things they like? This is a lot to hold in our neocortex. And that is a limitation that we have. Of course, on social media and in the internet, that boundary seems to no longer exist. And I'm saying seems because what we see is actually that, yes, you can be connected to millions in some cases. You know, celebrities have a lot of people following them. But are those two-way relationships? Usually they're not. Can you have more than 150 two-way relationships? Yes, you can. But then the quality of that relationship cannot be that strong. And if you're choosing to hold a lot of people on a low intimacy, low kind of interaction frequency level, it means there is less space in the core. And this is why a lot of us feel lonely these days. I think a lot of people feel lonely, maybe not all the time, but a lot of the times, because we have people in our life, but they are on the fringe. They're not in the center of our life. And that's where the internet can be helpful, but also tricky because it facilitates that almost.
Yeah, definitely. So, going right back to that, loneliness and the feelings there, that's a big factor in our well-being. And, we've learned that loneliness can be detrimental to our well-being. So with this rise of netiquette, right, the Netizen etiquette, I can't even say it anymore. It's like such a big word. How does that affect our well-being? Because obviously with all of these interactions, the online context that is bringing into our lives, I'm guessing there's got to be some research about how it's been impacting our well-being in general.
Yeah, so it's mixed actually. A colleague of mine at Cambridge has been looking into teens and screens, I think, just looking into the effect that being online has. And with any introduction of new technology, there tends to be a fear that this is the downfall of humanity. So when the radio was introduced, there was a big mass hysteria around it. And then the TV came and we thought, oh no, we're doing... And, then the internet emerged and people were like, that's it. And so in a sense, I wouldn't say it's that black and white. It isn't necessarily a cause for more loneliness. I think that would be a stretch to say. I think it matters how we are interacting with the internet. So there is evidence that if we are using it to sort of just passively absorb a stream of media that's coming at us, and I think for that reason, I'm a little scared of TikTok because it just keeps coming at you and it doesn't stop. That kind of engagement with it can lead to more feelings of loneliness and isolation because you are not part of this digitally, socially connected world, but you are kind of peeking in as an outsider almost, like you're looking at something, you're not being part of it. So I think as soon as we see ourselves as separate and we are actually also perceiving the distance to the people that we're looking at as being rather large. So this can be physical distance. You might see friends of yours that are halfway across the world and you're like, oh, I wish I was there. And it can make you feel sad because you're not. It can also be social distance. If you're following some sort of influencer, supermodel, some person with a lot of social influence that is living this life that seems very far removed from you, especially because if you're looking at a picture of someone lounging on a private island with a private jet, for instance, you are likely maybe in your bedroom or on a sofa looking at phone, taking that in, right? If you are also happening to be on vacation, it might be a different feeling. If you're on the beach, you look at someone else on the beach, you're like, we're both at the beach. That is nice. Most of our scrolling, we don't do in the moments that we're actually enjoying life. We're doing it in the moments where we're not enjoying life or where we're just trying to pass the time and we're actually not living life to the fullest. So it highlights this discrepancy and it might make us feel worse about ourselves. When I talk about netiquette, I think it's how do we actually engage with what we're given, right? So what I've talked about so far is just observing it, taking it in, but not necessarily engaging with it. Etiquette implies that there's some sort of interaction taking place. So this is taking it a step further. If I now choose to become an active agent in the online space, I then have a responsibility in terms of how I present myself. On the one hand, I think we can free ourselves from some constraints. We talked about guilt and shame earlier, right? So sometimes I think it can be a place where we might be able to show facets of ourselves that perhaps in our real life aren't as welcome. It's a very great space for people with interests that are maybe not represented where they are, with identities that maybe aren't represented where they actually live, to connect with like-minded people and to feel that sense of belonging, which is absolutely beautiful. So there is a space to show up in a way that is different from how you're showing up in real life that I think is beautiful and that fosters connection. However, it also, at least in the past, used to give us a sense of anonymity that sometimes then gets to people's heads. And then they think, I can do anything, I can be anyone. And then that's true in a way. And what a beautiful, potential to be the best version of yourself. But a lot of people don't choose that path. They will instead choose to alleviate themselves on some of the feelings that they might be struggling with in their own life by throwing it at someone else, right? So if I have body issues, if I am concerned about my looks, my weight, or whatever it might be, it might then feel momentarily great to throw it at someone else. If I see a YouTube video and I'm like, your nose, like, look at that, right? Maybe I'm self-conscious of my own nose. Maybe I'm not. It shouldn't really matter, but that's often what's at the core of it. Like, it's me not being happy about something and then using the platform of the internet and the freedom that it gives for self-expression to actually throw all of that destruction out there. And netiquette is the attempt to bring us back to our responsibility and our power and actually shaping how we're interacting with that space.
Yeah, that is so true. And even the online space has changed so much now because, you mentioned TikTok earlier. We have so many different platforms nowadays. And I think Instagram introduced Threads. And I still, I cannot keep up with all these things, to be very honest with you. I just know they exist and I don't use them. But clearly there's been a shift in how people interact online. And so that's why there's this concept of netiquette, right? Because you have different platforms, different ways of communicating. And what I've noticed is people spend an awful lot of time on the internet and sometimes with people that they don't know. More than with people that they know, right? So how has it changed actually? How has this interaction online changed?
Yeah, so I think one of the big changes, and I've been slightly saying it earlier, we used to feel like we could be truly anonymous online. And I think in the early days, you would make up these long, rather embarrassing usernames that you would just now be like, oh no, I can't believe I called myself that, because that seemed to be the norm. So etiquette is a lot... is connected to the norms in terms of what do we perceive to be the way to interact in a certain setting. So we used to see it as a way to interact with strangers while staying strangers, and that had a certain set of social norms and rules associated with it. We are seeing a shift to more accountability in terms of your name actually representing your actual name. We are seeing a diversification of platforms. So there are indications in terms of how do I show up here. On LinkedIn, for instance, you would show up rather differently than you might do on TikTok. And I think that is implicitly understood in the way that those platforms are curated in terms of who they're targeting. And you can often see the same. I've laughed out loud once. I've seen someone who was posting on LinkedIn, someone I know, something about like so proud and honored to start this job, like this whole spiel about being very, very excited about a new position. But then on a different social media platform that was more private, it was like, yeah, I left that other job. Woo! And it was like together it was giving a beautiful overall picture, and I was thrilled for that person. But it was really funny how intuitively there was an understanding of what do I reveal, how, where. And I think that is growing with people. We have the generation just below me, I think, is astounding and great in so many ways. They know things that I wish I had known at that age. And I think there's a lot more awareness of you're actually interacting with people that was lacking before. So we're becoming a little bit more aware of, okay, so if I'm writing something that has the potential to make someone's day or to crush someone's day, some people get high on that power and they're like, let me crush the day of as many people as I can. But can you imagine if that person found out that making the day better for as many people will make them feel so much better? I think there's a potential in the air for us to understand this now and to see that, yes, I have a power over other people's lives. This is something that I think we're lacking in the grand scheme of things, because globally there's so much going on that seems so hard to get to grips with, and it's so complex, and the challenges we're facing right now, they can seem overwhelming, and you might feel like, well, how do I matter in this? I don't know if I have any chance of making a difference, but I sure can make so-and-so feel a certain way by posting something, right? Great, like that is great. Use that to make the world better. Really use that to make the world better, and do not underestimate the effect it has. I think the issue that we've had before Netiquette has become more of a thing that we're discussing is that we really, really undervalue how big of an impact we have. So we think it doesn't matter if I shame someone online, if I gossip about people, if I'm not being nice, if I send people unsolicited messages or picture material or whatever it might be. Like, we don't think that we matter. We don't think that we're having an impact on these people. We do. That's great. So acknowledge you have power. I think that's wonderful, but then use it in a way that you would like to have it used towards you, and notice how it makes you feel. Because if you're saying something unkind to someone online, that might give you a moment of, yeah, I showed them. And then that moment will go away. And if you're reflecting on your identity, like, I am someone who trolls people, I don't know how many people truly take like a deep sense of accomplishment from that. That might be the odd person out there. I'd love to meet you. But I think on the whole, it doesn't make us feel like good inside. But if you know you've made someone's day better, even just by saying, oh, like that looks beautiful, something very superficial, something minor, and you see that person light up and like actually say, oh my God, that made my day, or I had a rough morning and that turned it around, that will stay with you. And you'll like walk through your day and you're like, I made someone's day better. That's I think what we can aim for. And that's what Netiquette is helping us to do.
Yeah, definitely. That is such a great thing to point out, because, I remember you were saying earlier in your definition, if you were to show up in real life, would you do this? Right. That's actually a really important thing that I think people don't think about, and they don't ask such questions. It's kind of like there's a door, you got to knock it first before storming in. And, when you're at someone's house, what would you do? It's just like, these are really common things that we know in real life, but in the online context, it's kind of hard. I know everyone is probably aware about this. Even the most ignorant person might know a thing or two about netiquette. But for all of us, I think we can all improve how we show up online. And so how can we learn more about netiquette?
Yeah. So first of all, I would observe your own interactions with people through that lens of netiquette. So of course you can Google netiquette, you can read things about it, right? But I always feel like if you're actually wanting to learn quickly, it needs to be a felt experience. You need to actually see what happens. So if you're looking through your own, maybe things you're receiving online, and just see how that lands with you, right? Sometimes we get messages from people we don't know. And this is something that I often say when people interact with me. There can be differences in terms of showing up offline and online. For instance, if you meet someone on the street and you're trying to strike up a conversation, it might actually be a good start to just say hello. I think that is very kind. You're sort of not coming at them with anything, and you're opening a conversation and you're waiting for them to respond if they want to, because you happen to be in the same place at the same time. Online is the same true. Make that a question and a hypothesis. I, for instance, find that I do not have the capacity to answer people that just write hi, because I might see it days later. I do not know what they're about. Are they potential clients? Do they want to collaborate? Is this a person I know under a name that I don't recognize? Is this just somebody that tries to sell me some sort of scheme? I don't know, right? So it's different from meeting in real life in the sense that in this instance, it would be helpful if the person's making the first step is giving some sort of explanation as to who they are, what they seek, what this is about, so that the other person can gauge whether this is something you want to interact with, right? So it's not always the way you would show up in real life is the way you want to show up online. It's asking the question, is this an appropriate thing to do right now in this setting? So see what comes at you and see, like, is this actually appropriate or is it not? Does this make me want to interact with this person or does it not? And then reflect on, do I do this, right? Because it's the funniest thing in the world. It's so easy to see other people doing it wrong and not realize that we're doing the same thing, either exactly the same way or slightly differently, but like in essence the same. So that's, I think, the best way to learn what netiquette is to you, because I don't even know if we have one definition that everyone would agree to. And there might be cultural differences. There might be, lots of individual differences coming into it. But just observing, how am I being interacted with? What works, what doesn't, why? How am I doing on my end? What works, what doesn't, why? I think that's all we need.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really important point, because observing our own behavior and compare that to other people's behaviors and see where we stand, it's important. It's kind of like practicing what you preach, right? You can say all you want, but if you're doing the same thing, like for example, if someone say, "Oh, I hate ghosting. I hate when people ghost me," and then you go and ghost somebody else, it's probably pretty much the same. So it happens.
Yes.
And people just kind of they have different ways of interacting, and you too. So I think setting boundaries is also kind of important, and learning what to do when, like you were saying, it's actually not as easy as it sounds, because for example, if you go to school, they will teach you, okay, this is how you behave with others. No one actually teaches you how to behave online.
Mm-hmm. And I think you made a good point about boundaries. It's also more difficult with strangers because you legitimately do not know how they see the world. So ghosting, I think, is such an interesting topic because people stand on that varies so wildly. There's people who do it and don't care. And there's also people that are actually ghosting because they have made really negative experiences trying to politely cut off a connection. And so whether this is I think in the dating space, this is the most pronounced, where someone is trying to tell the other person, "Oh, actually, I'm not interested," and the other person not taking that well. And that might then lead the person who tried to next time around just be like, "You know what? I'm just going to ghost this person because I've tried and it wasn't, the etiquette around that was not upheld from the other side. So I might be better off just leaving this conversation," right? And I think any of those can work. It's a lot about us understanding that people are different from you. So I think this is one of the keys to happiness, really, is not taking things personally, because we know so little about the other person that we legitimately cannot gauge what they mean with that behavior. That's what's often missing, right? Because one person might ghost because they just do not care, and you would really have preferred for them to tell you, "Look, this isn't happening." And other people might ghost because they think, "Oh, I would actually prefer if someone just gently phased out rather than presenting a cold, harsh truth that's turns out I find you really boring." That's a difficult thing, to hear. So what is kinda? We could debate for hours. What is kinda in what situation? And the less you know the other person, the more likely it is that you do not understand where they're coming from. So grace is an important concept here too. People will mess up. People will not get it right. Can you hold your values and your behavior and your kind of guidelines that work for you, even if you are faced with people not doing the same? And can you acknowledge that potentially they're not doing that to harm you, though, in their mind, that might be the kind thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's such a great point. I think it also it comes back to how you view situations, and at all times, I think it's about knowing that you're doing the best you can, and also be understanding, because different people interact in different ways. I think what truly matters, though, is how you interact with your closest friends and your closest people in your circle. I think that's the most important thing. With strangers, it doesn't matter as much because you barely know them. So there's no point crying over them in a way. I think the internet kind of complicates that sort of that aspect of social connection. But when we really set boundaries for ourselves and direct our attentions where it should go, I think that's going to be more important than worrying about every single little interaction, because some things might be funny and you can laugh it off and then that's it, or you can dwell on it for days. It's not going to help your well-being, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think differentiating what matters and what doesn't can be really helpful. I have had some nice situations where people I didn't know, they would approach me in a way that was sort of, in a gray area. And I have had multiple situations where I took the time to be like, hey, it would have worked this way. It's not working that way because of that. And actually had an interaction where it was like, oh, that's actually very helpful. And I was like, yeah, no problem. There's sometimes people that are offering collaborations or something, and it's pitched in a way where I'm just like, how do you expect this to work? And so sometimes I just give people the benefit of the doubt. And I'm like, well, I would, if it was me, and I think that the request is genuine, but just the way it's gone about is just not helpful. I might actually appreciate someone just telling me like how it could work. And I've had actually positive experiences. So sometimes even with strangers, you have these moments of true connection where like you see them and then they feel seen and they're like, oh yeah, that actually makes sense. So sometimes there's room there, but if you have the energy, if you have the time, you feel up to it. Other than that, I think it's also perfectly fine to just shield yourself from it and not feel any kind of need to show everyone on the planet what Netiquette is all about. I don't think we have that capacity.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great point. Now, I know we've covered a lot of grounds with, Netiquette, what it's like, and how it's evolved with time. But for our audience, I think it's also good for us to get practical. So let's go into our practice part. We would love for you to share a practice that you personally do and you think would benefit everyone when it comes to Netiquette. Or, in other words, what is a practice that we could all try to nurture healthy online interactions?
Yes. So one thing is about what you share. So whenever I share, I ask myself, why do I want to share it? Like, what's in it for me? What's in it for the audience? And what's in it for the relationship between the two? I think that alone is going to revolutionize the way that you're interacting with people online. Because often we post either for our own sake, like I want to, brag or show off, or, like I have a need to broadcast something. That is often not fostering connection, but more distance, because it's like, look at me, I'm different from you, and like, better in some way. That alone doesn't do so well. If we're only, I want to say a caveat here, because I think I've said something similar before, and I think a valid counter argument is, I don't want to have to please other people by how I express myself. I think that's absolutely valid. And I think there are some accounts that are using, where the users are seeing it as a sort of digital diary, and they just want to share what they're going through for their own sake, as like a memory keeping kind of place, right? I think that's also beautiful. If that's your intention behind it, own that fully, and just know that there is a potential of people not resonating with it, but that is okay because you chose to use it that way. So again, conscious choice, right? It's okay to just do it for you. I don't want to make anyone feel like that's potentially wrong. I think that's actually a great way to do it. However, you can elevate it by then also thinking, how does that serve people? Whether this is your closest friends and family and you just want to update them about something you've been doing in a timely manner, or whether you're like, oh, this might actually be helpful to someone who's coming across this maybe years from now and who's like, oh, that really helped me. And then last but not least, how is that actually working for our relationship? And it might be a relationship to people you already know. It might also be a relationship to potential people you want to call in. And that third piece is something I find really beautiful, because it's already thinking about the netiquette. It's like, how can I invite connections in with this? How can I offer an opportunity for people to maybe ask me something, to share something with me, to feel like they can approach me, or to feel like, oh, this person might have knowledge for me around this or wisdom to share around this. So that's something that I think is really helpful when it comes to sharing. When it comes to interacting, dare to show your support more. So one of the things that we as humans do a lot less than we could is celebrate yourself, one another, life. So when you see things in other people that you like, it really is nice to just celebrate it. And it makes you feel better. It makes them feel better. It makes everyone feel better. There's really nothing you can do wrong about that. I try my own practice, when I look through stories, I try to interact. I try to send hearts and things, not to everything, because I think it should mean something. Like if you're just blatantly like, I love it all, everything's great, then that kind of loses the magic, right?
Totally.
But if there is something you see that you like, tell people. And the more personalized you make a compliment, the better. So if you're just like, beautiful, that's great. And that sometimes is all we have in us. But if it's something particular that you can highlight as to why it resonated with you, that can really make someone's day. So be an active agent in terms of like sharing love, like just give appreciation, just give celebration out as much as you can. And last point, when I receive something that at first strikes me as not falling within the parameters of netiquette, I do not reply straight away. I've distanced myself from it first, because sometimes I will read it a certain way, and if I read it again, I actually take it a different way. So it's like, what was the tone and what was actually meant? And if you're if you're having an emotional reaction, then often that part of our cognition isn't switched on. So once you're angry, once you're upset, you don't see it for what it actually is. So put some time in between, then reevaluate, and then actually think about, do you want to respond to it at all? Sometimes the answer is just no, and that's absolutely fine. And if you want to respond to it, is that making the situation better? Because if you're just trying to beat the other person back, is that feeling of like, yeah, I've showed them, is that really adding to the situation? I think if we just play around with that a little bit more, we can save ourselves a lot of these back and forth situations that aren't really getting us anywhere and are just sucking energy and time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And we can all practice that more because, we all interact with others online. And it doesn't have to be social media, right? Sometimes it's just even sending messages. Can you give a better response? Like I think about this all the time, especially when I text my mom, because, we don't call very often. We mainly text. And, I try to give meaningful answer rather than just half-hearted, oh yeah, or just like the message. I think that really matters when it comes to close relationships and those that you really want to nurture. And, with situations where it's a bit more tricky and you kind of don't know how to react, I really like that part where you said you have to distance yourself from it and kind of, think how you're going to read it actually. Maybe it's not as bad as you think it is, or, maybe there's a better way to respond. And I think that's what we can all try and do more of. And that's the beauty of the internet, actually. It's not like a conversation that you have to respond now. You can take your time with it and respond in a nice way.
Yes, I think you said something very important about when it's meaningful relationships, we do want to put care into our replies. With that often comes, we almost call it like friend homework. Like if someone sends you, like on one social media platforms, they send you a bunch of funny things. And then on another platform, they might send you a couple of messages or an article about something. And then on another platform, they might send you a long voice note and they're like detailing their weekend, like a lot happened and you need to respond to it, right? So this might be your best friend in the world, but you might be overwhelmed at the influx of material. And then there is a perceived hurdle to respond because you want to do it justice, but you do not have the bandwidth to do it right now. So then what often happens is you're temporarily ghosting your friends, myself included. I do this sometimes and I'm not happy about it because I want to do a good job. It matters to me, but I don't have the space, the cognitive, whatever it might be, to fully give myself into it right now, to be really present with it. What I've found to really help in those situations is to just share that with the person, to just be super excited about this message. I will reply right now. I can't, but I'm thinking of you. That is helpful because you're signaling to this person, it matters so much that I'm taking time, not it doesn't matter at all, so I'm not bothering.
Definitely.
Those are really, really, really important things because often I think it can feel like we're neglecting other people in our life And that might not have anything to do with that person whatsoever and with the relationship. Of course, there's also situations where it's one-sided. One person is consistently, trying to hang out and the other person is like, I can't. Then maybe a conversation needs to take place. But very often it's just, especially if you're not in the same geographic location or you're not sharing your same day-to-day life. As you said earlier, one person might be family in the suburbs. The other person might be like running around the city all day, right? Those people might have very, very different lifestyles where one cannot fathom how the other might not have 5 minutes to respond, but it can be the truth. So netiquette is a lot about actually not necessarily putting yourself in the other person's shoes, but just acknowledging that you don't know what it's like to be in them. That often suffices, because the more we try, if I was that person and would probably feel this, the more likely we are to be wrong. And then we're sitting with this image of what we think this other person is thinking and doing, and then we get super mad because it's not right. But this whole image might not be true. So as long as we're thinking, I don't know what their life is like right now, and I don't know how they've perceived that, helps you kind of breathe and just be like, well, let's see what happens. I'm not necessarily taking it personally because there could be a zillion scenarios that I have no idea about. So let's just see. And on the other hand, taking the responsibility of actually informing someone if there are things going on. It's like, I'm going to be traveling for the next 3 weeks. I might not get back to you. And being a little bit more forthcoming with reasons so that we understand each other a bit better.
Yeah, that's a really great thing, actually. I really like that you point that out. It's a really nice gesture to actually let other people know that, I really want to respond to this well, but I'll get back to it rather than just not responding for a while. And I need to learn this myself as well. Sometimes I get overwhelmed and I'm like, I don't know how to respond. And then I forget to respond to it. And so, we're all learning.
And you don't also, there's different situations. There's situations where I get a message and I'm just, in nature somewhere and I'm like, yay. And I have time for this elaborate response and I'm being witty and I include all these inside jokes and it's great. And there's another point in time, maybe a day later, where I'm walking down the street from one appointment to another and I get 18 different people wanting something from me all at once. And I'm like, oh, so if the same person writes to me to both days, they'll get a very, very different Mary that has the capacity to respond or not. And that says nothing about that person. That just says something about what I'm currently facing.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. That's where, trying to understand and be, sort of be compassionate and be understanding, because you might do the same thing. It's such an important point when it comes to online interactions nowadays, because we're bombarded with information all the time. It's not like the old days where the only source of information you get is from when you get a call. Anyone can reach you now, with a text. So,
and you're also, I think it's also important to gauge how you're communicating what to whom. And I know, so cognitively, this is always more work for you as the sender of a message, but it pays off in the long run. I have some friends that love the voice notes, and especially the ones that live very far away in different time zones. We might just converse in voice notes for weeks and weeks and weeks and ends, because it does allow that time flexibility in terms of when do I wish to reply. And they can be long, long messages. And then you have the task of keeping track with that and how do you respond to everything. I have other people in my life that despise voice notes and that just really, really do not want to listen to a voice note. So I know who do I talk to this person versus to that person. Acknowledging that and being okay with that to a certain degree is helpful. Likewise, I love getting voice notes. I hate getting crucial information in voice notes. If it's a date, a time, numbers, addresses, I want those written down, because if it's what's the point? If I'm then I'm sitting there scribbling there, right? So when you're sending a message, think about, are you giving this person a treat or work? That matters, right? Am I giving you an exciting story? I know if I know you care about my life and I don't know, I'm waiting for the bus and for some reason that was hilarious, I could then leave you a 10-minute spiel about standing there waiting for the bus. If I know you enjoy that kind of thing and you feel close to me and you're we shared an everyday moment together. If I know you could not care less about me missing a bus or waiting for a bus, why would I waste your time by talking about it for 10 minutes if I know you don't care about it, right? So be clever with what you're sharing. And sometimes the rebuttal to this is, but should my friends just, unconditionally listen to? No, that's not true. Your friends should not just be a garbage can where you're offloading whatever you want to throw at them. There might be a time and place where that where that might work, that might, occasionally that might happen. But the people in your life are treasures, and you have to actually treat them as treasures, because then they will treat you the same way. So the more we're protective of our own energy and of our other people's energy, and the more considerate we're becoming in how we're interacting, the more you're going to get that back. Maybe not from the same person, but you will get that back. And that's somewhere where all of us benefit. So being mindful of what are you throwing at people? How are you throwing at them? When? How do you demand a response? Like, demanding a response in and of itself has a certain kind of energy behind it. All of those things fall within the realm of netiquette, and we can just become more conscious about how it makes us feel, and then think about how we want to show up.
Yeah, well, that's great. And thanks so much for sharing that. I think you've shared all the wonderful things today with our audience about netiquette. Great topic, lots to think about. And I know we don't have much time left, but we have open mic, and I would love for you to share something that you're passionate about with our audience, perhaps on this topic, perhaps on something else, maybe something you haven't got the chance to mention yet. So go for it.
So one thing I find really fascinating right now is our relationships to our phone. So it is fakely connected, because I feel like most of us are severely addicted. And just because it's most of us, we kind of make that mean it doesn't really matter. And I find that an interesting topic where I'm looking into it more. There might be a course about it that I'm going to offer in the near future, in terms of how do we actually change the relationship we have to our phone. Because I think this idea of full abstinence is impossible in a modern world if you want to take part, right? We can't just be like, I'm off, I'm no longer online, like no one can reach me. That doesn't work. But how do we interact with it where it is an asset to our life? It makes life easier. We can look up things, we Google whatever we want to our heart's delight, but where it doesn't take over, and when we're not reaching for it all the time, where it's not almost controlling our every move to the degree that I've seen it happen, because it's such a beautiful tool for connection and also to just facilitate your everyday life. But in a lot of people's lives, it is just like doom scrolling, and words like that are things that I hear more and more, where people are so attached to their phone and it doesn't feel like it's adding to their life. It just feels like they can't be without it. So I find that super, super interesting, because I also sometimes am very consciously navigating my relationship with my phone, and I see how easy it is to persuade yourself to just keep scrolling a little longer, and to, you're setting boundaries with yourself, and then you're like, yeah, but right now it's a little different. So I find it really interesting. I find it very interesting generationally, because even I have great aunts that are all in their 80s and 90s. Some of them are like on their phone all the time, which would not have been the case 10 years ago. I see very tiny children that are navigating the iPad in a way that spooks me, because they're so competent at it, but they're also so like mesmerized and hooked to the screen that I think it applies to everyone across the board. And it's something I feel really passionately about, because I really think it has the potential to enhance our connections, but it often ends up making us feel less connected and more isolated.
Yeah, that is a really good thing to think about lately, because, I think about that a lot, actually, with my nieces and nephews. When I see them, most of the time, they're screaming for an iPad. And, I just cannot imagine growing up that way. It must be a challenging environment even to navigate. I wonder how that's going to impact their lives, and how that's going to impact parenting, relationships in the future, and so many other aspects. But yeah, I think it is a new age question. Our relationship with our phones, our devices, it is something to truly think about. But I guess, when we do have meaningful things that we are doing, when we're truly enjoying life and having meaningful connections with people in real life, that definitely helps, because, I forget about my phone when I'm with my friends and with people that I love. And so I think that's beautiful. We should have more of that.
And celebrate that, because I almost feel like it really pains me whenever I see a group of people sitting together and they're all on their phone, because don't get me wrong, there are situations where that is great. So you might have people sitting around and they're just sharing photos with one another that they took during that day, right? Absolutely fine. There might even be humor in a situation where you're sitting in the same room and you're like in a group chat together. Like, you can make that a fun experience, of course. but often you're missing what's right in front of you. So going back full circle to the definition of well-being, right? Like you're missing the moment by being somewhere else, and you're spending it with people that are not there in favor of the people that are surrounding you, which can make sense. If you're commuting, you're surrounded by strangers, and you can be connected to maybe your child, your parent, your friend, your partner. That makes sense, right? Then we choose the connection that is virtual. But very often we're surrounded by wonderful people that we would gain something from hanging out with them right here, right now. And we're not really like taking that opportunity. So I'm glad to hear you are taking it. That is great. And I hope more people dare to do it and to really put the phone away, because the thing is, even if it's on the table face down, your mind goes to it all the time and you're still super, super distracted by the presence. Although you might not even touch it, you might not see a notification coming in, the mere presence is messing with your attention. And as you said about kids, like I'm so grateful that I've grown up without that, because I think just in terms of brain development, it's so hard. It's such a powerful, the screens are really, really, really powerful, which again has great potential, but also it's like a moth to the light. Like you can, make the screen move and the eyes will go. And that is something that I think it's going to be interesting to watch how that's going to develop.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It's such a great topic to think about more nowadays, and very on brand with Netiquette as well, actually. I wonder how, the younger generation is going to grow up to have, a very different kind of Netiquette, how they're going to navigate this space. So more to come with the future, for sure.
Yes.
For our audience who would like to find out more about your work and maybe reach out to you, where should they go?
I think the easiest is Instagram. So it's Dr. Mary Kempnich. As I said earlier, if you do want to reach out to me, please write more than hi so that I know where you're coming from. Tell me that you listen to the podcast. If you have questions about it, please ask. Don't hesitate. Just put that in the initial message so I know to look out for you, and I will actually respond.
Wonderful. There you go. Great application of our conversation today, actually. Thank you so much. And thanks again for being here. This has been really fun. And, I could have gone for another hour, but I'm conscious of time. So we'll let you go, and hopefully we'll have you back some other time and discuss this topic or maybe some other topics.
Yeah, I would love that. It was fun. Thank you.
You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.